All right, guys, so these are the reading selections for lessons 1.1 through 1.6. So if you would read along with me and make notes where necessary in your science notebook at the end in the reading selection notes area that we've already set up on your notebooks. So this first reading selection is on Galileo and experimental science. So, in Lesson 1, you made observations, took measurements, recorded and analyzed data, and discussed your findings with your classmates. This probably seems like a logical way to do science, but this always hasn't been the case. In ancient times, scientists were curious about the world around him. These early scientists often relied too much on general observation and what previous scientists have done. They were often reluctant to question authority. All right, so we're going to just kind of draw attention to this. You don't have to write anything down for this first part, but just remember, early scientists were often reluctant to question authority. About 400 years ago in Western Europe, things changed. A number of scientists began to explore the world around them with a fresh eye. Everything interested them. They looked at things in a new way. They did not just observe things and record information. They experimented to see if their ideas were correct. So this is a key piece of information here. And this is something we do today. When we have an idea, we experiment to see if our ideas are correct. So make note of that. One of the most famous scientists was an Italian named Galileo Galilei. Galileo was born in Pisa, Italy in 1564. At age 17, he entered the University of Pisa. He planned to become a doctor, but he soon became sidetracked. Galileo began to make observations that were happening around him, and he found them much more interesting than what he heard in the lecture halls. Even the simplest things could be fascinating. For example, Galileo sat in church and watched a lamp swing from the ceiling. He soon realized that its movements were regular. He could time them with his pulse beat. When Galileo watched different lamps, he discovered that there was a relationship between the time it took for a lamp to swing back and forth and the length of the chain from which it was suspended. He also discovered that the lamp swung back and forth in the same amount of time, regardless of how broad or narrow the swing. Galileo did not find any immediate application for his observation of the swinging lamp. That would come later, with those are the moons at the bottom here. Of the pendulum clock. It didn't matter. The experience was important because he had identified and documented a mathematical relationship in a universal event, the swinging of a lamp. As Galileo became more involved in science, he began to record his observation in notebooks. This was another important distinction between him and earlier scientists. These notebooks in which he frequently made sketches enabled Galileo to share his ideas with other people of his time. His notebooks, which still exist today, give us an insight into the imaginative and his creative mind. So this is a reason we use Science Notebook, guys. That way we can share our ideas with scientists or other students. So Galileo was also a famous inventor. One of his most astonishing devices was a military compass that could aim cannonballs at the enemy. He achieved his greatest fame as an astronomer. However, he built his own telescope. With it, he made observations that revolutionized our understanding of the universe. He saw craters on the moon and thousands of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. In 1609, Galileo looked at the planet Jupiter and saw 4 small points of light circling it. At first, he thought they were distant stars. As he continued to observe and record what he saw, he finally concluded that those points of light were actually moons in orbit around the planet. Today, these moons are called Galilean moons. Galileo's ideas sometimes got him into trouble. We're going to just kind of bring this back to our first point where we talked about scientists had an issue with authority. They often didn't question it, and this is going to be why. Some of his observations convinced him that the planet Earth revolves around the sun. For centuries, people had thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system. This idea was very controversial, especially to the leaders of the church, who put Galileo on trial for heresy and threatened him with torture. To keep Galileo quiet, the church leaders put him under house arrest for the rest of his life. Galileo could no longer speak in public, but he remained convinced about his belief about the solar system were correct. And of course, they were. The Galileo space probe, launched by NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in 1999, honored this famous Italian scientist. Its mission was to observe Jupiter and send back information to Earth. The space probe also sent back information about the four moons Galileo saw. To Galileo, these moons were 4 tiny points of light. Take a look at the pictures from the space probe on page 10. Do you think Galileo would be pleased to see his moons in such detail? All right, so discussion questions. What process did Galileo use to come to his conclusions? Take a moment, pause the video, and come up with an answer. All right, so it would actually be of what we now call the scientific method. He came up with a hypothesis, he tested it, and he saw if his experiment was correct. What other scientists have gotten into trouble for their ideas, and why? All right, so pause the video. You guys can use Google to do some research on this. Come up with 2 scientists. So your assignment for this, for number 2, let me get the pen tool to work. So for number 2 here, find 2 scientists who have gotten into trouble for their ideas. You do not have to write this in your notebook, but you do need to answer the question in your notebook. And then make sure you say why they got in trouble or who got them in trouble. So pick a scientist, what their idea was that got them into trouble, and who they got into trouble with. And we'll refer back to that. All right, so this will conclude the reading selections for 1.1 through 1.6. Make sure you have your notes and your discussion question answered in your notebook. All right, you guys have a good day.